starting Brian's fourth hit. We're building up to 2.5 miles per hour. We're tracking his heart rate via a wristwatch, a Garmin.
This is Jamie Haynes from the Stroke Special Interest Group, and we are doing a follow-up question and answer session with Marissa M, who provided the great video a little while ago about high-intensity interval training with her client on the treadmill. And so we just had some questions and wanted to know a little bit more about your thought process, Marissa, and how you put this together to give such a great outcome for your client. So welcome, thank you. So question number one, what was your main goal for including high intensity interval training with your client?
Yeah, so my client came in about 3.5 months after his stroke, and he was what I would call a little bit more moderate functioning. You know, he was walking in with a quad-based cane, contact guard, but he was using a wheelchair for all mobility besides like in his home. So when I first saw him and went through some outcome measures, I really thought high intensity would be great for him to really start pushing not only his gait speed, but also just his confidence with his mobility. I really knew he could be someone that could be more of a functional community ambulator and start getting rid of that wheelchair, and also just to really decrease assistance with overall activity.
What were the challenges in trying to think about working with high intensity interval training with this particular gentleman?
Yeah, I was definitely, I'm not sure if you've seen someone with Marfan's disease, Jamie, but that was my first time. And it was really, I had to actually do some research because I was a little concerned. He already had open heart surgery. He was only 41. He had really severe pes cavus chest. He's like 6'7". He's so tall. And so my thought were like, well, I really got to be careful with blood pressure and heart rate, because I don't know what this man's aerobic capacity is like. So that was my first primary concern, just how I was going to work with that. But in the end, I looked at his blood pressure pre, during, and post just to make sure he was doing okay in the first couple of hits, really tracking his heart rate, finding the best way to wear a heart rate monitor. And after that challenge, after those initial ones, I felt a lot more confident.
Great. What were some of the positives that thought, yep, we can do this?
Yeah, well, I think when we got him on there, we started to do it, his confidence like truly rose quickly. He was like, wow, I'm walking so fast. And he was really impressed by himself and the fact that nobody, yes, he was in a harness, but nobody was holding on to him. And the fact that we were getting the heart rate range that we wanted to, and the time amount as well. And so I knew I really wanted to just keep going with it 3 times a week to see what sort of results we could get in 5 weeks.
What was his response when you asked or told him that you were thinking about doing this as a activity?
Yeah, well, as you know, people with like expressive aphasia have their statements, and his face was just like, he kind of dropped into, whoa, you're gonna push me kind of face. And he was a sedentary person lifestyle before, so he was not used to being pushed like this aerobically. But I think the education component is so important. Making the person understand, making the family understand what is the purpose of HIITs is huge for them buying in. So I always discuss it before we do our first HIIT. I sit down a patient, I say, hey, here's what high intensity interval training is. And we know it drives neuroplasticity. Here's what neuroplasticity is, and really describe to them the importance of high intensity to keep causing important changes to the brain. Something I always use as an analogy, and I got this from one of my old bosses, is the demand and supply. So if we demand of the brain to give us more, it's going to supply more. If we're not pushing you and it's not challenging, it's not going to supply us more. And that really clicked for him. He knew it was going to be hard, but he understood that. And also, I always describe to patients, hey, your progress doesn't stop. Yes, you have this window of like really good progress, but there's no reason why you can't get better months and months after a stroke as long as we push you. And I just think that buy-in is so important, and taking the time to educate a patient about why we're doing certain exercises, especially HIITs, just really motivates them more.
I love that analogy. I think I'm going to use it.
Me too.
That's a great analogy.
I
This
better
idea.
give it. It was from my boss, Mike Studer. And so
Oh,
I better name him.
Mike is
Yeah.
awesome. Yep,
Yeah.
Mike is
So
awesome.
thank you,
Yeah,
Mike, if you watch this.
awesome, awesome. He'll be happy that you put a shout out to him. That's
Yeah.
great. And then tell me about how you calculated heart rate because he was on medication for the Marfans.
Yeah, so because of the beta blockers, we used the different calculation, which I do not have on hand right now. I'm
Okay.
happy. I'll send that to you though.
Okay.
But I have it all written down. Unfortunately don't have it memorized, but
Okay. That wasn't a question I had on my list, so I should have given that to you ahead of
that's
time.
okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. I'll send it to you.
Okay.
That way you
Great.
guys can have it on there.
Okay.
Yes, I use the calculation for beta blockers, which puts him at obviously a lower heart rate range.
Mhm.
And then I actually just use my Garmin. I put that on his wrist to be able to track him. And then I always use an RPE scale just so we can make sure we're keeping him more in that moderate high intensity, but not overdoing it.
Okay. And you used the full RPE scale. You didn't use the modified 0 to 10. You used the
Yeah.
full one. Mhm.
Yeah, I keep the full RP like right by our treadmill. I have a laminated one that has not only the words, but it has the colors and the smiley faces, just in case people need to communicate with me differently.
Okay.
That way it's just right there. I know where it is, can use it easily.
Is there anything that you would have done differently looking back?
Yeah, good question. You know, with his I think when we got around to his second round of doing his high intensities, I realized we weren't getting the same amount of progress. So I've reevaluated him twice now since his initial eval. And that second time, we weren't getting as big of results. And so I really had to question myself if we were still pushing him well enough. And so I actually decided to start changing up his speeds to keep him at even a little bit of a higher intensity during his rest. So now his high speed and his low speed are a little bit more similar in the hopes that I get a better changes. So I think that was the one change. I wish I would have done that the second time around
Mhm.
instead of this third start. I also might have pushed him on a different balance measure too, because I did the Foursquare step test and the tug. And the reason I chose the Foursquare is I I like to see something a little more dynamic, a little more agility balance, and it's an easier test to run. But I think at this point he's ready for the FGA, so I wish I would have ran that test with him.
Okay, great.
Like next time.
Great. Anything else you want to tell us that you think that would be something you learned or something important that PTs should consider when they're starting to do some of this knowledge translation from what we know in the evidence to the clinic?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think so. We can push HIIT anywhere. We don't have. It doesn't have to be on a treadmill. We don't need the moderate functioning patient. It can be a low functioning patient if you've got a new step or a recumbent bike. It can be anything where we can push them aerobically. But I really think clinicians need to be good about tracking heart rate and tracking RP. We can't just put someone on the bike and be like, okay, push yourself hard for 45 seconds. We can't trust that they're going to do that. So I think it's really important that a patient gets guided through their first, 10 or 12 sessions of HIIT just to make sure they actually understand what it's like to be pushed at high intensity and that the numbers are matching it. And I
Great.
promise you, you're going to see changes. I mean, I love HIIT. I think it's just the coolest thing. And I think patients are so impressed by themselves when you retest them.
Have you done any the HIIT stuff not on a treadmill?
Yeah, yep. So I've actually done the new step a couple times with people who just their gait just falls too much when they're on the treadmill, and I've seen some great benefit from that as well in a person's capability to just walk farther with a little less assistance. And also, I've done it on. We have a water treadmill, so I've done it in the water as well.
Wow.
That's obviously really different with the heart rate, but still a great place where they don't need to be so much body weight support. And then I've used the cycling bike too, like an upright bike. And I absolutely still see benefits from all of them.
Great. Anything else you want to share?
Um, I don't, great question. No, I think you asked some great questions, Jamie. And I think we hopefully really covered it. I hope people continue to really look into high intensity and look more at the research that can be done, because it's not just stroke population, it's so many of the neuro populations. And as I always tell a patient, we don't need to be scared to push someone just because they had this serious brain injury. Like, their body can be pushed, their body is capable of doing it. So don't hesitate to push your patient.
Right. I'm going to ask one more, and
Okay.
we'll see if we'll add this. But um, what what was your client's response to this? I mean, so you educated, he got on it, but to really, um, did he feel like he was getting challenged to a point where he couldn't believe what he was doing and how fast he was? I'm thinking about, like, he talked about confidence, and he wasn't an exerciser before, so the self-efficacy he gets, like, just because I've had a stroke doesn't mean I'm sick, or because I have Marfan's, it doesn't mean that I can't do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Him and his wife, they both were just really impressed. His wife would be like, "You've never pushed this hard. And look at you, like, after an injury, you're pushing this hard." And he was always, even though he would roll his eyes about doing it, he was always motivated. And he's like, "I know it's going to help me." And he would take a nap after therapy, but he always said it was worth it. So I think they were really both impressed by him and his capability despite what had happened to him.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to stop